It's not just going to be chaos, but it's going to be chaos that rewrites our relationships and rewrites the security that has underpinned, quite frankly, a huge part of the world for decades.
A short while ago, President Biden said civilians in Rafah must be protected.
The major military operation in Rafah should not proceed without a credible plan for ensuring the safety and support of more than 1 million people sheltering there. Many people there have been displaced multiple times, fleeing the violence to the north, and now they're packed into Rafah, exposed and vulnerable. They need to be protected. And we've also been clear from the start. We oppose any forced displacement of Palestinians from Gaza. Today, the King and I also discussed in detail how to get more humanitarian aid into Gaza from the very beginning. My team and I have relentlessly worked to get more aid in.
Well, Robert Gibbs was White House press secretary under President Obama and joins us now. Good evening to you, Robert.
How are you?
I'm very well. Really good to have you with us. Joe Biden and King Abdullah immediately walked out of the room after they made those statements to the media earlier this evening, not taking any questions from the media, when undoubtedly many of those questions would have been about the president himself after he got muddled up as to who was the leader of which country and which world leaders he'd been speaking to. And then that devastating report, which suggested that he couldn't even remember exactly when he was in office, and indeed even when his son died. Do you think there is a sense now that those around Joe Biden just don't dare to allow him to face questions from the media?
No, I mean, I think today's example it's important to, I think the president wanted to make a certain number of pronouncements and try to move the ball forward publicly. In doing so, sometimes you make a statement without taking questions. And I can understand that. I think, look, I believe, and I think actually the campaign believes this too, that the age of Joe Biden, quite frankly, the age of Donald Trump, are legitimate issues. We saw the ABC News poll that suggested that most Americans think both of them are too old, right? Though they're likely to be the two nominees, it means each side is going to have to demonstrate that they have the candidate that has the stamina, but also the thought process and the clarity of thinking to be the president, right? And that manifests itself in a lot of ways. I think you could look at what happened over the weekend and suggest that the flub that Donald Trump had, and when I say flub, I mean basically announcing his agenda to let and encourage the Russians to attack European allies of this country is the same sort of calculus that voters are going to have to make around, does somebody have the stamina and temperament to be president for the next 4 years?
And I am going to come to what
thing.
Donald Trump was saying. But
Yeah.
I mean, as somebody who must have known Joe Biden when you were working for President Obama, Joe Biden, of course, was vice president. I mean, he's not the man he was, is he?
Well, I'm not the man I was when I was in the White House. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, but you're not running to be the leader of the free world, with due respect.
Very fair, very fair. But I think, well, first of all, let's pull these apart. I think the notion that Joe Biden doesn't know when his son died is remarkably and deeply offensive. I doubt a day goes by, I doubt many hours go by that Joe Biden doesn't think about that day. And so I think the idea to suggest that, there's a word way beyond gratuitous, probably not good to say on the radio. I think this White House is going to have to show people that the president is up to the job. That means giving interviews. That means doing the campaign events, being out on the stump, making the case. Look, Joe Biden is going to have to take things that Donald Trump and others make mistakes on and be able to get up and give a speech and drive that message of why Donald Trump just made a mistake and why it's important to vote for Joe Biden. I, I think they're going to have to do that, and they're going to have to make sure people understand and see that. That's at a minimum of what I think voters are going to want and expect from, quite frankly, both candidates here.
Well, Joe Biden's re-election campaign has apparently joined TikTok in an attempt to appeal to younger voters, following all those concerns about the 81-year-old president's age.
Look, I think this is a remarkable number of younger voters get their news from TikTok. And I think being in that ecosystem is important for the president. And I don't think you have to be, 17 or 22 to be able to do to show up on that platform in a way that appeals to voters. And I think this is a pretty good, fun first step for the president. I think they'll have to do a lot more of this. Both sides will. You're going to have to take a group of people that we always talk about younger voters not showing up, right? So this is a perennial thing. And this is the latest platform that they're going to spend a lot of time on. And I think both candidates will spend a lot of time talking to voters and using this platform.
Well, let me just turn our attention to Donald Trump, because the former president has apparently asked the Supreme Court to suspend a lower court ruling that he does not have presidential immunity from prosecution. Trump had claimed in his election interference case that he could not be tried for acts that fell within his duties as president. This, of course, comes as he's facing a whole array of different court cases. And there's been huge concern amongst NATO allies after Donald Trump made those comments, suggesting he wouldn't necessarily defend NATO countries if they didn't spend enough on their own defense. I mean, what's your take on all of that, Robert?
Yeah. Well, on the court stuff, look, understand that last week, a court, 3 judges, 2 appointed by a Democrat, 1 appointed by a Republican, unanimously ruled that Donald Trump wasn't immune to prosecution, that the idea of 3 co-equal branches of government can't be superseded by a president that believes there is no sense of rule of law. And so I think, one, their argument shows in reality the depth at which and the depth in which he lost that case. It's clear he's also just trying to punt this as far and long as he can, so that it doesn't interfere with the election, doesn't interfere with his campaigning, but mostly because he doesn't want to have to deal with a potential guilty, a conviction to be found guilty of this. The NATO comments were in some ways the latest shock from Donald Trump, but I think as many people have watched his dalliances with Putin and his dalliances with this sense of dissolving NATO, maybe we aren't as surprised. I think the real challenge in this campaign is going to be for Democrats to make sure people understand exactly. Donald Trump says exactly what he's going to do. There isn't a surprise here, right? He's literally going to, he's told leaders this, and he's going to do more of it. And I think it's really important that the Biden campaign prosecute and use the words of Donald Trump himself to tell voters, swing voters, unaffiliated voters, independent voters, that this is what they're going to get with 4 more years. It's not just going to be chaos, but it's going to be chaos that rewrites our relationships and rewrites the security that has underpinned, quite frankly, a huge part of the world for decades. Keep in mind, too, the only time this has been triggered, as you well know, was after 9/11, when NATO came to the help and defense of the United States of America. Donald Trump doesn't understand that. He never will understand that. And it's important to make sure that the Biden campaign makes sure voters understand that.
Robert Gibbs, former White House press secretary, really good to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.